Today on Investigate TV Plus, when lives are forever changed at the hands of a school shooter. Should the parents of child suspects also face justice? I'm Tisha Pell.
And I'm Lee Zurich. We examine a landmark ruling in the future of these courtroom decisions.
It's about trying to ensure that no other families have to go through this.
Plus, a final act of kindness for those left without loved ones.
I imagine it's very difficult to be there when someone takes their final breath. It's easier than what you think.
We reveal how one man's death inspired a movement to ensure no one dies alone.
Then finding peace through painting.
You get to see something completely differently.
We introduce you to the group getting up close to capture nature's beauty.
In-depth stories that inform and inspire. You're watching Investigate TV Plus.
It was a decision the country had never seen before and one that could shape future cases.
Parents found guilty in connection with the actions of their son. In November 2021, Ethan Crumbley shot and killed 4 students at Oxford High School in Michigan. His parents, Jennifer and James, were sentenced to at least 10 years in prison for failing to stop what the sentencing judge called a, quote, runaway train.
It may seem novel, parents facing criminal culpability following their child's deadly actions.
But legal experts say it's likely to continue as communities grapple with widespread gun violence at schools.
In 2024 alone, there were at least 219 shootings at U.S. schools and 58 people were killed. One of those incidents at Appalachia High School in Georgia, where 2 students and 2 teachers were killed in a mass shooting. The father in that case now faces charges of his own.
Experts say these cases could signal a fundamental shift in the way our justice system holds parents accountable, particularly when gun safety is lacking and red flags are ignored.
As reporter Heather Graff shows us, this all comes as innocent lives are at stake.
It's incredibly difficult. It's every day.
November 30th, 2021 will forever haunt Steve St. Juliana.
It's not something that we'll ever get away from.
Because on that day, a student at Michigan's Oxford High School took a semi-automatic rifle onto campus and turned Steve's world upside down.
It wasn't until I was in the car driving up to the school, I think that things really started to sink in.
Hours later, Steve would learn the unthinkable. His daughter, Hannah, a freshman at the school, was one of 4 children killed.
Life is just darker with her gone. She was the heart and soul of our family.
The shooter was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but he didn't face a guilty verdict alone.
These convictions confirm repeated acts or lack of acts that could have halted an oncoming runaway train.
His mother and father were convicted of involuntary manslaughter in connection with the shooting. Prosecutors in both trials argued James and Jennifer Crumbley were grossly negligent, failing to secure firearms in their home and ignoring signs of their son's mental health issues.
It's not about punishing the parents for what the shooter did. There were multiple opportunities for them to prevent this from happening. It was repeated opportunities, repeated instances of negligence.
They were high-profile cases because no parents in this country had ever before been held criminally responsible for a mass shooting committed by their child. That fact not lost on Jennifer Crumbley, who spoke at her sentencing.
I understand this is a novel case and punishment expectations are high.
She and James Crumbley were both given 10 to 15 years in prison, the maximum sentence. Although their cases were the first of their kind, they haven't been the last.
Let's go ahead and bring in the defendant, Mr. Colin Gray.
In Georgia, a father faces dozens of charges, including second-degree murder, in connection to a shooting his son is accused of committing at Appalachia High School in September 2024. Prosecutors allege he provided the gun used to murder 2 students and 2 teachers.
I think this is that rare moment where those who are pro-Second Amendment and those who are more restrictive gun rights can agree on this.
Emory law professor John Acevedo says while gun rights in both Georgia and Michigan are fairly well protected, Americans in every corner of the country are fed up with the violence.
It really seems to be a combination of frustration by people that there's not a way to hold more accountability and to kind of stop these incidents from happening, as well as district attorneys looking for ways to discourage them from occurring again in their jurisdiction.
With regard to the Crumbley convictions, there is consensus in the legal community that they've created a new and important legal precedent.
Do you expect to see more prosecutors charging parents in these types of cases?
I do. If you can get a conviction in Georgia, that would give you two sort of different states.
Josh Horwitz is co-director at the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence, where through research and advocacy, he and his team are working to reduce gun violence 30% by 2030. He says these prosecutions could help achieve this goal.
We see too many school shooters getting their firearms at home, and I think the community in general are sick of that. And prosecutors specifically understand that they've always had a tool, but now's the time to use it.
Does this signal a fundamental change within our justice system?
I think time will tell. I hope it does.
As such, Acevedo says prosecutors will need to be thoughtful as they consider pursuing charges against parents.
There is the danger of over-policing and over-prosecution that may come with this.
But he adds responsible gun owners should have nothing to worry about.
The negligence in all these cases comes from parents not securing their guns in a proper way. That can be in a safe with a trigger lock by removing the ammunition from the house, keeping it separate if it is in the house.
According to Everytown for Gun Safety, 26 states and D.C. have child access prevention laws, which aim to reduce pediatric firearm injuries. But even in states without such legislation, gun owners could still face legal consequences if a child accesses the weapon and causes harm.
And really, in my heart of hearts, I hope we never see any other prosecution because parents will learn from this.
Back in Michigan, Steve has been a vocal advocate for reform.
It's about trying to ensure that no other families have to go through this. Our children have already been taken from us. It's not about us. It's not for us. We're doing this for everybody else because they just have no idea, no clue.
And he adds he hopes they never do.
People are accepting mass shootings in our schools as normal. And that right there has to change. Enough is enough.
We also spoke to a former Kentucky prosecutor who says just years ago, testing the limits of parental blame was far more controversial. In 2018, Mark Blankenship considered bringing charges against the stepfather of a teen who killed 2 students and injured 18 others. He tells us he wanted to prosecute, but says his colleagues weren't so sure.
The day after the shooting, I remember making the statement, this was completely preventable. And I would like to pursue charges against the stepfather because that gun should have been locked up. And I mean, the pushback was immediately. What I was hearing is it's not the parents' fault. It's not the gun's fault. It's the shooter.
And what do you think has changed since your case in 2018?
There have been so many school shootings now. It's just become a part of American life. And I think citizens are so sick and tired of it. They want it to stop.
Blankenship says he ultimately decided against indicting the shooter's stepfather. But he adds if the attack had happened today, he believes prosecution would have been more widely supported.
Colin Gray, the father being charged in connection to the Appalachia High School shooting in Georgia, pleaded not guilty to the charges against him.
As for the Michigan school shooter's parents, James Crumbley's attorney declined to comment on this story, and Jennifer Crumbley's attorney did not respond to our repeated inquiries.
Still ahead, a nurse's regret put her on the path to ensure no one dies alone.
By the time I got back to his room, I walked in there and his arm was outstretched from the bed and he had already died. And I get choked up every time I think about it.
We have an in-depth look at how her dedication to helping people pass peacefully now spans the globe.
Plus, while the U.S. excels at treating serious conditions in kids, experts say parents can help prevent health issues before they happen.
From birth to age 5 is really the time you can make a difference, and that it lasts a lifetime.
Still to come, we'll break down the proactive practices that can help your child's health.
Loneliness is on the rise in the United States, and we're not just talking about people without friends.
The number of people living alone has reached a record high. In 1960, the U.S. Census says 13% of households had a single person living there. By 2022, that grew to 29%.
It's a tough topic, but along with those living alone, there are those whose last moments are spent in solitude.
However, there are volunteers all over the world who make the selfless choice to ensure it doesn't happen for everyone.
Reporter Kristen Crowley explains the meaning behind the movement called No One Dies Alone.
When you work in a hospital, patient care is at the center of everything.
And I do some bed rolls. Yeah.
Tammy Skubal spends her days on a cardiac unit, organizing equipment, prepping rooms, hoping the next person who lies in this bed eventually gets better and goes home. But some patients will never leave the hospital. And that's when Tammy's promise for patient care goes beyond the expected.
I think in my own world, I can't picture somebody going through that by themselves. I just can't.
A promise to be with them as they die.
How many people have you been in the room with when they died?
3.
She is a NODA volunteer. It stands for No One Dies Alone.
We connect through stories.
Chaplain Becky Johnson runs the program at the University of Kansas Health System.
We train employees to become volunteers to sit with patients that have no family or friends when they're nearing the end of their life. This is really hard work.
The training covers protocol and how to sit vigil with the dying.
We could actually hold vigil from 2 hours to 3 days.
But talking about it is one thing.
I imagine it's very difficult to be there when someone takes their final breath.
It's easier than what you think. To know that you can bring someone that much comfort. People are more caring than what they give themselves credit for, but knowing that you can give someone that comfort.
NODA volunteers ensure no one dies alone, but they wouldn't exist today if it weren't for one man who did.
The man asked if I would sit with him, and he could barely speak. So what I said to him was, I'll come back as soon as I've checked on my other patients. And by the time I got back to his room, I walked in there and his arm was outstretched from the bed. And he had already died. And I get choked up every time I think about it.
Sandra Clark was a nurse at the time in Eugene, Oregon. She couldn't stay with him because of rounds. After he died, she came up with an idea to fill the gaps for hospital staff with volunteers. And No One Dies Alone was born.
Gosh, we had vigils going, Sandra, every other week, every third week?
Her colleagues Marty Blodgett and Ann Orden were there from the start in 2001, not just sitting vigil with the dying, but spreading word of the program. Ann says by the time she left as program coordinator,
the number was above 500 programs in the United States that were either No One Dies Alone or based on No One Dies Alone.
Today, it is still growing, reaching hospitals outside the U.S. in Singapore, the U.K., New Zealand, and beyond.
Now, more than 20 years later, what do you think of what this has become?
I hope that it has made a difference, and I think it has.
I believe he has cancer, and I hope he is resting comfortably and will slip away peacefully and without pain.
A difference you can see on paper. Some NODA volunteers journal about their experience, keeping the names of patients confidential.
Mr. P passed away about 20 minutes ago.
But making sure they'll always be remembered.
Do you know their backstory in sense of why they're alone?
I don't.
Usually our volunteers don't. I do sometimes. We teach that that's not important for them to care for a patient at this time.
It doesn't matter why they're alone.
No, so often teach, let's not judge why someone is by themselves.
A life lesson in humanity, even in death.
Becky wants people to know that people end up alone for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they alienate their family, other times they're the last surviving member. But she says volunteers don't typically know the reason because it's not important. If you're interested in becoming a NOTA volunteer, contact your local hospital and ask if they have a program in place. The University of Kansas Health System says right now its volunteers are all hospital employees, but it hopes to eventually involve community members.
Still ahead, they find peace while patiently painting.
I think the goal is to really hone your sense of observation.
Meet the artists of all skill levels, leaving the confinement of four walls to paint among plants and wildlife.
But first, our medical mythbuster explains how the habits you teach your child today can lead to lifelong wellness. For parents, helping your kids feel better when they're sick is a top priority.
Whether it's cold medicine or a trip to the ER, the key is making sure they have access to good medical care.
Vaccinations and regular checkups are vital, but so is what happens at home in everyday life.
Reporter Viv Williams explains in this Medical Mythbuster.
When a child gets a rare or serious diagnosis, there's no question they need expert medical care.
If you have a baby with a severe congenital anomaly or a child that's unfortunate enough to get a complicated type of cancer, there is nowhere on earth you're better off than in the United States because we do very well with that tiny subset of people.
Dr. Larry Moss says it's the day-to-day preventive care that's lacking, and the U.S. healthcare system has become reactive instead of proactive about children's health.
Reactive means when you get sick, you go to the doctor, you go to the hospital, and we do our best to fix that.
Moss says being proactive involves working healthy living practices into everyday life.
First and foremost, start early. Be well aware that from birth to age 5 is really the time you can make a difference and that it lasts a lifetime.
Nobel Prize-winning researcher James Heckman proved it in a study he led at the University of Chicago. The team followed 2 groups of preschool children for 30 years. One group of kids had a healthy snack every day, access to primary care, and some very basic education in healthy behaviors. The other group didn't have access to those things.
There was a markedly lower incidence of cancer in the study group. There was a lower incidence of diabetes and heart disease. There was a higher median income, and in every respect, there was a better life trajectory.
Moss emphasizes that many aspects of medical care, such as vaccinations, well-child visits, and treatment of serious conditions, are critically important for the health of our children. But even with that care, sometimes kids get bad diseases and it's nobody's fault. But he says children's health in general will benefit if healthcare leaders shift the focus from trying to fix problems that arise to helping prevent them from happening in the first place. With this Medical Mythbuster, I'm Viv Williams.
Still ahead, art in the open.
The backlit effect is really quite beautiful.
We introduce you to the group of painters exploring new brush strokes across their community. It's been a hobby for creatives for centuries. Plein air painting is the practice of painting landscapes outside with the subject in full view. The term comes from the French phrase plein air, which means in the open air.
A hobby for a Louisiana man evolved to include painters of all skill levels who meet every week.
Reporter Elizabeth Val introduces us to the group of artists taking their brushstrokes to the great outdoors.
The sunflower blooms of the Burton Museum and Gardens have an audience today.
I'm actually painting the back of a sunflower, which is kind of weird.
It's a gathering of artists.
The backlit effect is really quite beautiful.
capturing their bright beauty before it fades.
I think the goal is to really hone your sense of observation. When you're outdoors and you sit in one location for 2-3 hours, you notice things you wouldn't otherwise notice.
David Gary started bringing artists together to paint outdoors about 8 years ago. Since 2017, every Thursday morning, the plein air artists pick a different location around Baton Rouge, grab their paints and brushes and easels, and spend a few hours creating.
So that's what, almost like 400 paint outs, which is pretty amazing if you think about it.
You never know what to expect. And I don't know, there's also this thing where you get to see something completely differently.
Painting outside can also be a fresh challenge, learning how to bring only the supplies you need and paint through the elements.
Just that observation, seeing the nuances in the shadows and seeing as the light moves, all the different things, the bugs, the heat, things you have to deal with. It's a different kind of discipline, and I think it brings out the best in an artist.
So at the end of the day, it's not so much about what comes out on the canvas and more about what's absorbed by slowing down and looking around.
I've gotten to paint in different neighborhoods and different parts around town that I didn't know existed, and that are really close to where I live, and so that's been wonderful.
It beats the heck out of sitting at a desk and checking email all day for sure.
You know what's sad? When we're done with this show, I have to go sit at my desk and check email and not be looking at nice pictures like that.
Beautiful sunflowers,
Beautiful sunflowers.
And scenery.
Very nice. Yes,
Yes.
Good stuff. That's it for us on Investigate TV Plus. I'm Lee Zur.
And I'm Tisha Powell. Thanks for watching. On the next Investigate TV Plus, some Americans struggle to breathe as air pollution causes smoggy skies.
You could breathe, but it doesn't do you any good. You get weak,
You can't catch your breath.
Right.
We take an in-depth look at what's fueling unclean air, the unexpected places it's popping up, and the potential lifelong impacts on your health.